The birth of the United States in 1776 marked the beginning of a nation, but not the beginning of this land story. That tale began tens of thousands of years earlier. We don't know exactly how it happened, but evidence points to a breathtaking journey. Between 30,000 and 10,000 years ago, brave people crossed a frozen land bridge from Eurasia into what is now Alaska. Welcome back, fellow history enthusiasts. You're watching Legendary Anime Tales, where we bring the history to life with a unique anime twist. They weren't just wanderers. They became builders, dreamers, civilizations. The Paleoamericans evolved into diverse nations, each with unique languages, beliefs, and customs. From the Mississippian to the Adena, their cultures were as rich as any on Earth. Far across the ocean, another world was blooming. Hawaii remained untouched until Polynesian navigators, masters of stars and sea, arrived. Between the 1st and 10th centuries, they carved paradise from volcanic rock and ocean winds. Around the year 1000 AD, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, Norse explorers led by Leif Erikson landed on the coast of North America. They called it Vinland, a mysterious land with wild grapes, forests, and rolling hills. But the Norse never settled permanently. Their outposts faded with time, leaving behind whispers and sagas and archaeological traces in Newfoundland. In 1492, an Italian mariner, Cristoforo Colombo, known today as Christopher Columbus, set sail under the Spanish crown. He believed he could reach the East Indies by heading west. What he found instead would change the course of human history. 3 ships, a dream, and a monumental error. Columbus wasn't the first to reach the Americas, but he was the first to connect 2 worlds in a way no one could ignore. Columbus thought he'd reached Asia, but what he had truly discovered was a new world, vast and alive with civilizations of its own. Years later, another Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, sailed under both Spanish and Portuguese flags, determined to map this mysterious land. Unlike Columbus, he realized this wasn't Asia at all, but a continent no European had ever seen. It wasn't a shortcut to India. It was something far more revolutionary, a 4th part of the world. In a twist of history, the new world would bear his name, America, not Columbus's. And so began the true age of discovery. When the sails of Europe touched the shores of the New World, it wasn't discovery. It was collision, and what followed would shake the very bones of the earth. The voyages of Columbus and Vespucci shattered the old map of the world. In Europe, news of untold riches, gold, spices, and strange lands spread like wildfire. Monarchies scrambled to claim pieces of this new world, unaware they were trespassing on ancient civilizations. To Europe, it was a blank page. But in truth, the story had already been written by the hands of millions who lived there for millennia. Spain moved first and moved fast. With Columbus's voyages as a springboard, Spanish conquistadors landed in the Caribbean, then crushed the Aztec and Inca empires, bringing back gold and glory and spreading devastation and disease. They didn't just plant flags. They tore down empires. Following Spain, Portugal claimed Brazil under the Treaty of Tordesillas. France pushed into Canada and the Mississippi. And in time, England, slow but calculating, began carving its future on the eastern seaboard of North America. Each ship carried not just settlers, but ambition, greed, and flags soaked in centuries of war. In 1607, England established Jamestown in what is now Virginia, the first permanent English colony. Life was harsh. Starvation, conflict with native tribes, and disease took many lives. Yet the colony survived, driven by the rising demand for tobacco. Jamestown wasn't a beacon of freedom. It was a desperate foothold on an unfamiliar world. The arrival of Europeans brought more than trade. It brought viruses, unfamiliar weapons, and colonization strategies. Entire tribes were wiped out before battles began. 90% of the indigenous population would vanish within a century. The greatest collapse in human history didn't come from war, but from invisible killers. As colonies expanded, so did the exploitation of the land and its people. The triangle trade began. Enslaved Africans, American raw goods, and European capital in a vicious economic loop. A new world was being born on the backs of the broken. The land was rich, but the cost was blood. In just 1 century, the old world had rewritten the destiny of the new. The seeds of colonies were planted, empires carved the land, and ancient peoples faded into the background. But from the ashes of conquest, a new power would one day rise. Empires rose with muskets, but nations rise with vision. By the mid-1700s, the 13 American colonies were booming. Cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston buzzed with trade and ideas. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Britain's wars left it buried in debt, and it looked to the colonies to pay the price. They fought for the crown. Now they would fight because of it. When Britain taxed tea, colonists responded not with diplomacy, but with defiance. In 1773, they disguised themselves as Mohawk warriors and dumped British tea into the Boston Harbor. It wasn't just a protest. It was a declaration, loud, wet, and unmistakable. Britain struck back with the coercive acts, pushing the colonies to the edge. In response, leaders from all 13 colonies met to form the First Continental Congress, a fragile alliance, but a spark had been lit. They didn't yet speak of freedom, but they had stopped speaking of obedience. In April 1775, British troops marched to seize colonial weapons. In Lexington, the first shot was fired. No one knows who pulled the trigger, but history doesn't ask, only that it echoed across a continent. One shot, one war, and a country not yet born would rise from the smoke. Out of the tension, one man stepped forward, tall, silent, composed. George Washington, a former British officer and landowner from Virginia, was chosen to lead the newly formed Continental Army. He wasn't the best strategist. He wasn't a military genius. But he had one gift no British general had. He inspired trust. In his silence, there was strength. In his eyes, resolve. And in his heart, an unshakable belief that liberty was worth the price. He didn't seek glory. Glory found him. At Valley Forge, Washington's army suffered hunger, disease, and bitter cold. It was the lowest point of the war. And yet he stayed. He walked among his men, barefoot like them, silent like the falling snow. Where kings would retreat, he endured. He bled beside them, and they would follow him into hell. In 1777, American forces defeated the British at Saratoga, a stunning upset. This victory convinced France to ally with the revolutionaries. Soon, Spain and the Netherlands joined the fight, tipping the scales. It was no longer a rebellion. It was a war for the world. In 1781, Washington trapped the British army at Yorktown with help from the French Navy. General Cornwallis surrendered. The war was over. What began as defiance ended in destiny. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain recognized the United States of America as an independent nation. George Washington didn't crown himself king. Instead, he retired to his farm. True power lies not in conquering others, but in refusing to conquer your own people. A warrior, a farmer, a father to a republic. Not a perfect man, but the right man at the right moment. But freedom came with a hunger for more land, more power. In 1803, Jefferson doubled the nation overnight, buying Louisiana from France. By 1845, Texas joined. War followed, and more territory was taken from Mexico. By the mid-19th century, the United States was a young giant, expanding rapidly westward. But beneath its shining ideals of liberty, a deep crack ran down its spine: slavery. The northern states, industrializing and modern, called for abolition. The southern states, reliant on plantation economies, defended slavery as essential. Each compromise in Congress, each fragile truce, was like paper covering a wildfire. You cannot chain a man and call it freedom, and you cannot silence a storm by whispering to it. In 1860, a tall, awkward lawyer from Illinois was elected president. His name was Abraham Lincoln. Born in a log cabin, self-taught, and often underestimated, Lincoln carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders. He never claimed to be a hero, and yet, he stood between a country and its own destruction. After Lincoln's election, 7 southern states seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, marking the beginning of the American Civil War. Brother turned against brother. Fields became battlegrounds. The soil drank the blood of both the enslaved and the free. Lincoln, though no military general, became the spiritual commander of the Union. His letters, his speeches, his sleepless nights, they were all bullets in their own right. He turned the war from a struggle for unity into a crusade for human dignity. In freeing others, he freed America from its lie. Battles raged across the continent: Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh. Over 600,000 lives were lost. Farmlands became graveyards. Yet the Union endured. The sword can end a life, but only conviction can end an injustice. In 1863, Lincoln stood on the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg and gave one of the shortest, yet most powerful speeches in history. The Gettysburg Address lasted just over 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, he carved eternity into words. In April 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered. The Union was preserved. Slavery was abolished. The stars of the American flag were once again stitched into one. But 5 days later, in a theater in Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln was shot by a Confederate sympathizer. He died the next morning. The war ended. But the dreamer of freedom did not live to see the morning. Lincoln is remembered not just for saving the Union, but for redeeming it. In the heart of its darkest war, he rekindled the promise of America, that all are created equal. He came from the frontier and now stands at the summit of history. The 19th century saw machines rise. Rails laid across the land. Cities lit up overnight. In 1898, war with Spain gave the U.S. new territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. The age of American empire had begun. In the crucible of global conflict, America did not just fight wars, it was forged by them. In 1914, Europe was set ablaze. World War I erupted after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and soon the world was consumed by trench warfare, poison gas, and industrial death. At first, the United States remained neutral. President Woodrow Wilson urged peace, reflecting the mood of a nation still healing from civil war. But neutrality would not last. By 1917, the German Empire resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking ships like the Lusitania, and proposed an alliance with Mexico via the Zimmerman telegram, a betrayal too great to ignore. The United States could no longer stand idle. The world must be made safe for democracy. 2 million American troops crossed the Atlantic. Known as the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, they brought fresh energy to a war-weary Europe. Under General John J. Pershing, U.S. soldiers played decisive roles in battles like Cantigny, Belleau Wood, and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They called them doughboys, but in those muddy trenches, they became iron. The war ended, but peace was fragile. At the Treaty of Versailles, Wilson proposed a League of Nations, hoping to prevent future wars. Yet, the U.S. Senate rejected it, fearing entanglement in European affairs. America returned to isolationism, but the seeds of another war had already been sown in Europe's bitterness and economic despair. In 1939, Germany, under Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. Europe fell quickly. France collapsed, Britain stood alone. Meanwhile, the Japanese Empire expanded through Asia, invading China and occupying Korea. Once again, America watched but did not move. Then came the day that shattered everything. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war. The United States entered World War II, a date which will live in infamy. America now fought a two-front war. In the Pacific against the Japanese Empire. In Europe, alongside the Allies against Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Factories shifted to full wartime production. Women entered the workforce. The nation united behind the cause. In 1942, the Battle of Midway turned the tide in the Pacific as U.S. forces sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. In 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, on D-Day. It was the largest amphibious assault in history, and it marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Germany surrendered in May 1945, but Japan refused to yield. To avoid a bloody invasion of the Japanese mainland, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Hundreds of thousands died. The war ended, but the world had changed forever. One war ended. A shadow darker than war had begun. Emerging victorious from 2 global wars, the United States stood unmatched, militarily, economically, ideologically. But peace would not last long. In the ashes of war rose a new enemy, the Soviet Union. And so began the Cold War. It was a war without bullets, but not without battles. And it reached the stars. After World War II, 2 titans stood tall on a shattered Earth: the United States and the Soviet Union. Ideologically opposed, one championing capitalism, the other communism. They didn't fight directly, but through influence, technology, and proxy wars. Thus began the Cold War, a global chess match where every move could mean annihilation. In 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. It beeped above the Earth like a cosmic taunt. America was shocked and galvanized. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. John F. Kennedy, 1962. Thus began the space race. It wasn't just about science. It was about dominance, pride, and the future. On July 20th, 1969, the world held its breath. After years of failures, sacrifices, and technological leaps, Apollo 11 reached the moon. Astronaut Neil Armstrong descended the lunar module's ladder and uttered words that echoed through history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. While the race to the moon captivated the world, the Cold War also raged in the shadows. Espionage, proxy wars in Vietnam and Korea, and nuclear threats loomed large. Both superpowers built enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. School children practiced duck and cover drills. Spy satellites watched from above. Fear became routine. As rockets soared, the U.S. faced a war at home, the struggle for civil rights. African Americans, long oppressed by segregation and discrimination, rose to demand justice. Led by towering figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and many others, the movement changed the soul of the nation. Marches, speeches, sit-ins, and resistance reshaped the law and the conscience of country. I Have a Dream, Dr. King, 1963. The Cold War persisted through the 1970s and 80s, with moments of tension and relief. Then, in 1991, the unthinkable happened. The Soviet Union collapsed. The United States stood as the sole global superpower. Its ideals tested, its identity still in flux, but its influence undeniable. In the darkest nights, America looked to the stars and to its conscience. The 21st century didn't begin with a celebration. It began with smoke, fire, and fear. It was a clear, peaceful morning in New York City. The sun glistened on skyscrapers. Life bustled below, unaware that history was second from fracture. At 8:46 a.m., the first plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Then, another plane struck the South Tower. 2 more were hijacked. One crashed into the Pentagon. The fourth, Flight 93, was brought down in a heroic passenger revolt in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost. The world stood still. America is under attack. President George W. Bush. Behind the horror stood a name that would become synonymous with evil: Osama bin Laden. A wealthy Saudi, once trained during the Soviet-Afghan War, bin Laden had become the mastermind of Al-Qaeda, a radical Islamist terrorist organization. He believed America's global influence military presence in the Middle East, and support for regimes in the Arab world made it a legitimate target. We love death the way you love life. Bin Laden. For years, Bin Laden had plotted from the mountains of Afghanistan. And on September 11th, his plan shattered the illusion of invulnerability. The U.S. responded with Operation Enduring Freedom. Within weeks, American forces invaded Afghanistan, aiming to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban, which had sheltered Bin Laden. It was the start of America's longest war. With special forces, drones, and alliances with Afghan militias, the U.S. dismantled terrorist training camps and forced Bin Laden into hiding in the mountainous Tora Bora region. But he escaped. In 2003, the U.S. launched a controversial second war, this time in Iraq, led by President Saddam Hussein. The American government accused Hussein of possessing weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and suggested ties to terrorism. Though no such weapons were ever found, the war went forward. Baghdad fell swiftly, but what followed was years of violent insurgency, sectarian conflict, and political chaos. After a decade-long manhunt, Bin Laden was finally located in Abbottabad, Pakistan, living in a fortified compound. In May 2011, under President Barack Obama, Navy SEAL Team 6 launched a daring nighttime raid. Justice has been done. President Obama. The cost was immense. Trillions of dollars. Thousands of American and Allied soldiers lost. Hundreds of thousands of civilians dead or displaced. Entire generations grew up knowing only war. Though Bin Laden was gone, extremism didn't die. It evolved. Terrorism became a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more emerged. By the mid-2010s, America had begun withdrawing troops. A new chapter loomed, one marked by internal division, technological transformation, and a globalized world reshaped by conflict and fear. The wounds of 9/11 still ache, but the resolve remains. In the 21st century, America fought not just with guns, but with ghosts, shadows, and silence. And the price of peace was everything. This isn't just the story of governments or borders. It's the story of people, of dreamers, fighters, believers. This is not just the history of the United States. It's a legacy that still unfolds with every step we take. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories animated like this, subscribe and hit that bell. The past may be behind us, but its echoes still shape our future.